Welcome to Bunch Formation, your newest favorite college football show. I am Chris Vanini. He is David Ubben, and we are happy to be joined here today on today's episode by Memphis head coach Charles Huff. First off, David, how's it going, man?
Going pretty good. Excited to have Coach on the show. It's always good. The offseason gives us a little bit more time to breathe and have fun guests and go deep on just getting to know folks that are going to make an impact on the season and the sport. So excited about it.
Yes, and for people unfamiliar, Coach Huff has been a kind of rising guy in the coaching profession for a number of years. He recruited Saquon Barkley at Penn State. He worked for Nick Saban at Alabama, won a national championship. He won the Sun Belt as Marshall's head coach, went to Southern Miss, turned them around last year, and now takes over Memphis, one of the top programs in the group of six. We've both known him for a while. Coach, you and I first met way back in the day in Coaching Search when I was getting started in my career. Wanted to bring him on, share some fun stories, his background, and get some insight on what it's like to be a group of six head coach and work at Memphis right now and see what he's cooking at Memphis, which I have to assume are some ribs. How do you think about the barbecue there?
Well, it's definitely a place that has a multitude of food options that are really good. If anyone's ever spent any time here, obviously the ribs are well known, but there's a lot of different variety from what college students would love to eat to what you and I would love to eat. So that is a positive about this city. This city presents a lot of different options, bigger than cities I've lived in before outside of Nashville. Which is a positive. Gives our guys some things to do outside of football and academics as well.
Those central ribs hit, Coach, if you haven't had them yet.
I have not. I've heard, but I have not had the chance to get there. Busy would probably be an understatement, but
yep.
What we love to do, so it's been good.
And Memphis has to win back the Battle of the Bones with UAB, the big Rack of Ribs trophy. That's currently.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
It's
something today.
Yeah.
It's one of the best. Yeah. It's one of the best one of the best rivalry trophies in the sport. I think it went away for a little while, but it's back, and I'm excited about it being back.
Yeah, Coach, I want to start this off with a kind of a random football question, but it's something I saw you say recently. You've said it in the past. I've never really heard a coach say this before, but I pretty much 100% agree. You won't use timeouts on offense. And why is that? What's the philosophy behind that?
Well, first, let me say that that's a general statement, right? I'm not, just saying, but my general philosophy is on offense, there are ways to stop the clock. There are ways to control the speed of the tempo of the game. The penalty on offense for not having enough time on the play clock is 5 yards. Mm-hmm. Well, in today's college football, the game is played at such a high rate. The ball is snapped. Your opportunities to gain 5 yards back is greater than on defense, where you may not have the right personnel. You may not have the right call. There may be confusion. There may be just you're playing a tempo team and you can't stop them and you can't slow it down and you need to get your D-line rotated. So I've reserved it for defense. I just think if you run out of time on the play clock on offense, you get 5 yards, you get to kind of line it back up. You dictate, by substitution, who's in the game, who's not in the game. On defense, if we don't get the personnel right from the sideline, or we get the wrong personnel in, or we get the wrong call in, it could cost you a touchdown. And I think the risk versus reward of what you get from being able to stop the game on defense is greater than it is on offense. Now, obviously, there is situational football, 2-minute drill, end of the half, end of the game, where you have to be conscious of what you're doing. But my overall philosophy is I use it on defense because a mistake on defense, a misalignment, missed call, can't get guys off the field, your D-line's gas could cost you more than 5 yards. And on defense, yards are at a premium, when you're talking about the free ones. Offense, you get 4 downs, you can run another play. Defense, you can't say, hey, our D-line is tired, so don't run the ball. Or you can't say, hey, our boundary safety's got the wrong call and we're going to have a wide open receiver running down the field. So I've used it on defense predominantly, and then when we get into situational football, we'll use it on offense. But even in that situation, on offense, there's ways to stop the clock. You can spike the ball. You can get the ball out of bounds. There's ways to stop the clock. There's not ways to necessarily prevent scoring when you have issues on defense. So to me, the risk reward is always greater to stop it on defense.
I completely agree. I've seen situations where a coach uses it, delay of game. You need that timeout. So I saw that and I was like, that's exactly how I've always thought about it. So it's good to see. Good to see you've been doing it.
Coach, I want to take you way back. March Madness is upon us. You walked on at Hampton as a fullback. If my calendar serves me correctly, you may have made the decision beforehand, but you walked on a few months after one of the greatest upsets in March Madness history. Hampton rallies to beat 2-seed Iowa State in the first round back in 2001. How much responsibility does that game deserve for your decision to walk on at Hampton?
Probably zero at the time, and I had no clue that basketball was even a thing. I wasn't a basketball player. My dad coached women's college basketball and then high school women's basketball for a long time. So
interesting.
Basketball was kind of like, I don't want to do that because dad's at work all the time, and I wasn't really good at it. So I didn't really follow it. Now, when I got to Hampton, obviously the buzz on campus was still very high. That team, that coaching staff, those players were well regarded on campus. Some of those guys I'm still friends with. You have those kind of monumental moments, and you remember the game, but you also remember the people. Sort of like when we beat Notre Dame, I remember every student manager that was on that trip. I remember every donor that was on that trip. Obviously, the game was huge, but when you have those kind of moments, it's the people that you really gravitate to. So when we got to campus, following that upset, we gravitated to the basketball players because they were like superstars at that point, and what they had done for the university and community was something that had never been done. So it was definitely a moment of gratitude for them, and then very much appreciation.
You walk on as a fullback, as we said. You finish your career as a starting center and a captain. That was already kind of a rare thing to see, but you feel like we might be seeing less of it now in college football with roster limits and all kinds of stuff. As a former walk-on yourself, I mean, how do you feel about the state of walk-ons, and is that a big loss for the sport to perhaps not have as many of them?
Well, I think it's going to balance out, right? Because there's more levels that you can play on, and there's more schools at those levels. So, fast forward the clock 20 some odd years, maybe I'm playing Division II or Division III. And maybe I'm still paying for school, or maybe I'm getting some type of assistance through financial aid or whatever. So I think there's going to be opportunities. You may lose the walk-on who has always wanted to go to Texas, or always wanted to go to Georgia, and maybe from a skill set perspective, they're not going to be able to make that cut now. But I think there's still going to be options. They can play 1AA football, they can play Division II football, they can play Division III football. It may deter some of the lifelong college football fans. Some kids grow up in some states and they're going to the state school, or they're going to the flagship program. And their commitment is not necessarily how many touchdowns can I get, but it's, I've always wanted to go to this school. I'm going to walk on. I don't know if there'll be any more Rudy stories out there, but I think there will be options. I think kids will be able to, play maybe down a level now, and which is, to me, is going to probably improve the product at those levels, because there's going to be some kids who, maybe walked on to Alabama and probably would never have played, but just wanted to be in that environment. And maybe now they're playing Division II football at a high level. So I think it's just changed a little bit. You're probably going to see more or better improved talent at the Division II, III, 1AA level now, because there's going to be some guys who you can't just walk on to the big school and your family be able to pay for it or whatever it may be, and you live that experience of being at that big school. If you want to play college football now, you may have to play at a more tangible level than you could 20 years ago.
You finished your career, you immediately go into coaching under James Webster. We're at Tennessee State. Did you ever consider another coach or another career route, or when did you figure out, like, I'm putting all my chips in the coaching basket?
When I was about 5. I went to school and they had this class called math. And I was like, if I got to do this for the rest of my life, I am not going to be successful. But no, I've always wanted to be a coach. I really never had another passion. Obviously, in my degree, I got a physical education degree because I wanted to learn the teaching modalities. I think that's really important in coaching. My fail-safe plan when I came out of high school was my dad said, you're either walking on or you're going to the Army. So I did not want to go to the military. I have a lot of respect for the military personnel, and I could not do what they do. So I respect them a lot. So I was kind of all in on the coaching. Now I wasn't sure college, high school, where I would be. I knew I wanted to coach in college because I still like the maturation process. But I had no other options. And maybe that's why I've been able to have some success in my career and be around some really good people, is because I didn't have, an option B. I really, I had some personal sacrifices. I wasn't interested in getting married young and wasn't trying to have children young because I felt like that may hinder my ability to move around and take some jobs if you got a family involved. I talk to a lot of young coaches now, and they, hey, coach, how can I, move up into the college ranks? Well, you may have to take a job making nothing. You may have to take a job where you got to sleep in the office or sleep in your car. And some guys just aren't able to do that because, well, coach, I can't do that. I got a family, which is understandable. So I was probably making some sacrifices along the way to keep options open, which allowed me to probably take some jobs that, if I had to go home and talk to my wife about moving to Orchard Park, Buffalo, New York, and with very, very little money, maybe wasn't the best thing, or having to go to College Park, Maryland and sleep in the locker room for a year. I don't know if my wife would have been able to sleep on the same couch that I was on. If I had kids, from a financial standpoint, how do you support a family and chase a dream that, you've heard, stories from coaches who work for, $12,000 and, 6 years later, they're, in the SEC. So that was kind of my path. And I think part of that was not having a second option. It kept me focused on what I wanted to do. And I was able to chase that dream longer than maybe if I'd had some other options.
And did you know that going in? I mean, that you were going to have to make that sacrifice? Like, that was the plan? Is that part of being the son of a coach, as you mentioned? Like at what point did you realize that?
I knew that in order to move up into coaching, you move a lot, which doesn't necessarily allow you to put down, roots anywhere, so you're in one place for 6 months, you're in another place for 6 months, you're in one place for a year, you're in another place for 9 months. It doesn't really allow you to kind of, establish yourself early, because it's like, well, I could buy a house here, but I'm probably better off renting the apartment. So if I got to get out of here quick, it's easier. So I think from seeing my dad, when I was born, I got to about 6 or 7, he got out of college coaching because of, family. You can't necessarily drag your family across the country. I'm into some situations now where we have a teenager who's just about to hit high school. So you got to kind of say, well, do you move before they get to the 12th grade, or once they're in the 12th grade? So there were some things that I was able to avoid by being driven on the purpose that maybe you can't, even in your profession. And I don't want to make coaching sound like this awful profession, but there's professions out there that, in order to move up, you have to move around. And sometimes getting around the right group of people may mean 3 different states in 3 different years. And sometimes that's not as easy when you have other responsibilities. It doesn't always mean family. It could be anything. So I was blessed enough to be able to see my dad have to sacrifice and make some decisions, and kind of gave me a little bit of insight.
I always made that connection, because when I started my professional writing career at AFCA, I think you and I met there. I think you might have been at Western Michigan at the time when we met. And I'd always connected with the young coaches who were moving around, just trying to stay in the business and wait for that big break. And it's very similar to the journalism industry, honestly. A lot of working for not much money, waiting and waiting and trying to find that break. But you did move around a bit early on, and then you land at Penn State in 2014. And it's there that you recruited Saquon Barkley. You were his position coach. He becomes obviously a great NFL player. What do you remember about recruiting him? What do you remember seeing in him? Was his recruitment like unique in any way?
Yeah, it was really unique. It was myself and Sean Spencer, the D-line coach who was at Penn State, who's now back with Coach Franklin at Virginia Tech. And we're recruiting the kid, and he's not even the top running back in the state of Pennsylvania at the time. He's a good player. Saquon is one of the few players now with as fast as recruiting is going, where his senior year was much better than his junior year. One of those late bloomers. You really don't see that anymore because recruiting is so sped up, and basically kids are making decisions at the end of their junior years. So we were recruiting him and the number one running back in the state at the time. And we would say, all right, we can get the top two backs in the state. One of them will be, pretty good. It was he went to a very rural kind of middle of nowhere school. It wasn't a powerhouse. Matt Millen had played there, but it wasn't one of these recruiting factories where, there were 5 stars and 30 offers. He was actually committed to Rutgers because he went to a camp and they offered him and he was like, okay. So when we got there and we started recruiting him, obviously Penn State is the flagship program in the state. It made sense to him, but it wasn't one of these, hey, we're recruiting a 5-star. It was kind of, hey, we think he can be a good player. He's got some good skill sets. Once he committed to us and then he had his senior year, we were kind of like, wow, this kid's pretty good. Still, even then, we had no envisionment of the Saquon Barkley that we know now. Everyone in the building thought he would be a good player, but no one was saying, hey, this guy's going to be special until he got to campus. The one thing that was, when you look back on it, his personal and inner drive to be great was always there. He always wanted to be the best. When we started recruiting him, we said, hey, this is what you got to do academically to get where you need to be. He locked in, he did it. He was running track and, he wanted to improve his speed and agility and all of those things. And then we talked to the people in his high school. There was just glowing reports of him as a person. I mean, there was no, bad character. I mean, everyone loved him, thought he was the nicest kid, genuine, humble, grateful, appreciative. And I think that's what turned him into who he is, right? Don't get me wrong. From a physical standpoint, he's been blessed. His family has done a great job of raising a good young man. But he is so appreciative. He's so driven. He's so humble. It allows him to be coached. It allows him to learn. It allows him to continue to research. So that's what I think ultimately made, the Saquon we know, because we've all seen great players that just don't have the right makeup, right? They're not hard workers. They're not as determined. Things come easy, when you're a good player athletically. But Saquon was the total opposite. And that just was the drive that made him, in my opinion, who he was. But no one in our building will ever say that, yeah, we knew Saquon was going to be great. Everyone thought we had a good player, had some good skill sets, but it was first day of camp, and he, split an inside zone, pressed the line, and jump cut probably 3 gaps back and went 60 down the sideline, and everyone was kind of like, whoa. And then from there on, it kind of went, the story is what it is, and he's done a phenomenal job of representing not only Penn State, but him and his family.
He's one of those guys that you hear so many tall tales, like it's hard to separate fact from fiction. Like I spent a lot of time in Texas. Adrian Peterson is kind of in that group. But when you see the stuff he does on the field, like obviously the backward hurdle, that clip from the drill at Penn State where guys just can't get a hand on him, and it's like no story is too outlandish. What's the craziest thing you ever saw him do?
He's a freshman at this point. And they're power cleaning. And he power cleans 395 with ease. And we're standing kind of up on with ease from the floor, not just hang clean, from the floor. And we're standing up on the Raptors, and we're kind of looking down as coaches, and everyone's kind of around. And I see the strength coach putting more weight on the bar, and I'm like, guys, what are we doing? And they put 405 on it, and I'm like, this is impressive. 405 off the floor for a true freshman. And he walks up and rips the thing like no other. And the whole weight room goes wild. And I'm at the top. I'm like, that's enough. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't need to see 425. I don't need to see 450. But just to see that pure strength from such a young person. I mean, we had seniors on the team who, weren't at 405 power clean. And just to see that pure strength and athleticism, and obviously you guys are well knowledgeable in football, the mechanics and explosion that it takes to rip that kind of weight off the floor and flip it and catch it is just speaks to the volumes of his athleticism. And that's probably the one where I was like, whoa, that one, and then probably the USC run.
Yeah.
You watch that run, and it's as the coach, it's like, wow, this is awesome. So we're breaking down film the whole game, getting ready to go play. It's a big game, obviously. We're breaking down film, and we had talked about that year. The year before, he had got caught on some long runs, and we were talking about, being able to hit the home run and what separates at that time, it was the Ezekiel Elliott's and the Christian McCaffreys from you, Saquon. Well, they can hit the home run. They don't get walked down from a 60-yard run. When they break, they break. So we spent all summer working on his knee drive and working on angles, and he hit 3 or 4 home runs that year, and you really saw the coaching come into it. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't tell him. I'm not telling him for too, but the angles and understanding, how to get in the transition phase from running. So we're watching film, and I told him, during that week, I said, the only person on this field that can catch you if you split one is Adoree Jackson. I said, so every time you run a play, you have to know where Adoree is on the field, because if you split one, he's the one guy that can run you down. And if you go back and watch that clip, once he breaks and starts kind of going across the field, he's looking back over his right shoulder every time, because Adoree was the right corner. And just as a coach, to go back and have him take that carryover into a game, okay, now what we're saying in meetings, he's actually taking to the field. So those would probably be the two. I mean, most people don't even realize that, but if you go back and watch, he breaks to the right, and then he starts going back across the field, and he's kind of looking over his right shoulder like every 5 yards, because Adoree Jackson was the one corner on the field, obviously how fast he is, who actually could run a guy down. So that's the type of person he is. If you talk about something in the meeting that's going to help him perform better, he's going to carry it to the field.
You worked under James Franklin twice, at Vanderbilt, at Penn State as well. What was the biggest thing you learned from him in terms of being a head coach and being a coach? Yeah,
detail and organization. I've worked for him actually 3 times.
Okay.
University of Maryland, I was a GA or QC for him, and then Penn State, and then Vanderbilt, then Penn State. The detail in which he operates. He could tell you what he's doing 3 years from now on this day at this minute. It was unbelievable. As a QC, you'd walk in with the game plan, and he'd have you make some corrections. You go make them, and he'd walk in and you put the game plan on his desk, and before you could get out of the room, he had already made 3 corrections that you didn't see, that you missed. Just that amount of detail to the littlest things probably carried over for me more in recruiting. Is the doorknob clean? I remember we're sweeping the field at Vanderbilt because it had snowed, and we had a visit, and we wanted the logo in the middle of the field to be visible from the press box when we went up to have dinner. Walking sidewalks before the groups come through to make sure there's no trash, making sure you open doors, like the little details in recruiting that probably often get breezed over. But when you have that detail in everything you do, everything's important. So that would probably be the biggest thing that I picked up from him. I still write with a red pen because I still have flashbacks of the red marks on game plans and the red marks on papers, that things that I should have saw that I didn't see that he gave back. But it really taught me to be detailed and detail your work, and be detailed in recruiting, be thorough in recruiting. Knowing the mom's first name, not just her last name, or knowing the kid's middle name, or knowing the kid's girlfriend, or what's his favorite teacher. Like those little things matter. I know it's kind of cliche, but it matters. And when you carry that kind of mentality through everything, you're really detailed in all you do.
2019, you end up at Alabama. What's a Nick Saban job interview like?
Well, it was interesting because they were still playing when the opportunity happens. They were still in the playoffs. I want to say Orange Bowl. So during the break, at that time, it wasn't the 12 game. You had the end of the season, kind of SEC championship, and then you had about a 2-week break before you started the top 4 playoff run or whatever it was. So I get a call and I go to his house, because he's like, well, we can't meet anywhere because everyone knows who I am. So we can't meet at a hotel. We can't meet at an airport. At that time, I was in Starkville, which was about an hour away, if that. So I drive up to his house, and when you drive up to his house, it's literally like driving up to the White House, not from the side, but from the aura. It's like, wow, this is Coach Saban's house. And then
I've seen the dark office on Zoom, but I've never been in there. So
yeah. So you go to his house, and he opens the door, and Miss Terry's there, and they probably got the biggest Christmas tree outside of the one in New York City, and it's like, oh my God, I'm here. And we go upstairs into his attic where we do the recruiting, and I'm actually talking to, at the time, it was oh my God, who was the OC? It was Josh Gaddis, and it was quarterback coach that was at Maryland, was at Arkansas.
Enos. Dan Enos.
Dan Enos is actually the coordinator. So I'm talking to Dan Enos. I'm interviewing with Dan Enos, and coach is just sitting there in his chair chewing Red Man. And I mean, he's just like got the stare of like, you don't know anything about football. And I go for about an hour and talking with Dan about pass protection and running game and all of these things. And, you're just going through, you're drilling, you're standing up, you're talking. And then finally, at about an hour and a half in, coach says, okay, everybody out, and puts everybody out of the room. And then he just says, that was really good. I'm like, wow, I thought I was doing horrible. And, we talked, and so I'm thinking, okay, he's going to offer me the job, and I'm working at Alabama. Well, we'll be in touch. And I go like 2 weeks and I don't hear from the guy because they're playing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I guess I didn't get the job. I'm calling everybody. What should I do? Should I call him? Should I text him? They're like, well, he doesn't text. So I'm like, well, I don't want to call him because they're playing. So finally I'm like, man, screw it. I want the job. So I call him, and he's like, hey man, we're getting ready for a game. I'll get back with you. I'm like, okay, well, I screwed that up. So they play and they finish. And I don't think they didn't win a championship, but they lost in the national championship, I believe. And then 2 or 3 days later, he called me and was like, hey, we want to offer you the job. I need you to be here today. So I actually got in the car and was in Tuscaloosa in an hour, but it was probably one of the longest week and a half, 2 weeks I've ever had in my life of just like, what should I do? But again, being very thorough, coach is very thorough, not a, okay, we're hiring you just because you've been at X, Y, and Z, but you know the game, recruiting, you can bring value to our organization.
Mm-hmm. It's good that he hired you, because I know Bobby Petrino once said that Saban's the king of interviewing people he doesn't plan to hire, just to kind of learn.
Oh yeah, I know. I thought that was a part of me too. Yeah, so I thought that 2 weeks or week and a half was my hey, thanks for coming and giving us some of your information on running backs, but we're moving on to somebody else.
What in your 2 years there, you win a national championship. What's your favorite story of what it's like working under him when you're there in the building every day?
Just the consistency and approach, man. Consistency and discipline. I've never seen a guy who can be more consistent, more disciplined, sees everything. Like there's no days off. And I'm not talking like literal day, like he doesn't take days off. Like he's always on. He's always looking at every detail. He's always organized. You know, if there's a meeting at 9, it's at 9. If it's at 9:30, it's at 9:30. Like he shows up to work every single day at the same time. 7:22, you hear his shoes coming down the hallway. You know, the consistency and discipline, it would probably be the biggest thing that I take away. And we worked hard. You know, we coached our guys hard, you know, but when you walked in that building, I tell people all the time, there was an aura in that building. When you walked in, you felt like it was 4th and 1, and everyone worked to that level of intensity. And you didn't want to feel like you were the guy, position, coach, trainer, whatever, that let the organization down. And I think Coach did a really good job of establishing that kind of feel or urgency. And to be able to do it for as long as he did it, it's unreal.
And when you get the job at Marshall in 21, you know, you'd interviewed for a number of head coaching jobs before that. What is that process when you're an assistant and you're trying to convince an athletic director and then the people around him to like, hey, like, give me this shot?
Yeah, you battle it, man. I mean, you know, I did 9 interviews before I got the first head job, and, you know, and all of them say, hey, you did good, but, you know, you don't have head coach experience. You did good, but you don't have head coach experience. And, you know, you get a little discouraged. It's kind of like, well, the only way to get head coaching experience is to become a head coach. But, you know, it's one of those deals you got to continue to work at. And I truly believe now, looking back on it, the right jobs you'll get. You'll get the one that you're supposed to get. There's other jobs that I interviewed for and probably wouldn't have worked out at the level of, you know, having success. But, you know, when you're going through that process, it's grueling, because it's like, all right, here we go again. Number 10, right? They're going to tell me, hey, you did a good job, but, you know, you don't have head coaching experience. And I was blessed enough that, you know, I was the right fit at the right time for what they were looking for. And forever grateful to that group of people and administrators and, you know, all the behind the scenes that went into that, because it really gave me the chance to get the head coaching experience. You know, now I don't have that knock of, hey man, everything's great, but you've never done it. So it changed my perspective on what the other 9 meant, because those weren't the right ones. And when the right one comes along, typically it works out.
What's the difference between you doing the first interview and the 9th interview? What did you learn in that span? And did you change like how you were presenting yourself?
You'd think that early in the process, you think you're going to wow them with your knowledge, or you're going to wow them with, you know, hey, I'm ready to do X, Y, and Z. Here's my 90-day plan. And really, the farther you go along in it and you get to 9, 10, and now that I've had a couple other ones, they want to see who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they of course they'd want to know that you have, you know, a plan, you're organized, but it's more about you being a fit rather than you knowing, hey, this is what I want to do. And the more that I kind of went through it, and, you know, after you get the Marshall one, the Southern Miss and Memphis, it was more just me being myself. You know, it wasn't me trying to sell them on, hey, I'm the guy for the job. It was more just, hey, this is who I am. If I fit, great. Let's continue a conversation. If not, I understand it. You guys got to go a different direction. But the more you do, you realize it's not about you going in there with this great book and being able to show them, you know, what to do in the first 90 days. And here's your plan in recruiting. It's more about you being you. Obviously, that information matters, but you wouldn't be sitting in that interview if they didn't think you had a plan. You wouldn't be sitting in that interview if they didn't think you were organized. They want to know, okay, do you fit us? And everybody didn't fit everybody. I interviewed for a job this year, and I won't say where. As 3 minutes into the interview, I was like, this ain't gonna work. I don't fit this group. And they're great school, great people, but just my personality, my approach just wasn't there, wasn't the fit. And it wasn't a bad interview. I mean, you know, you still go through and but you can tell when you get on the Zoom or you get in the room, it's not going to fit. You know, this is what they're looking for and who I am don't fit. So it doesn't matter how good I interview right now. It doesn't matter if I show them, hey, here is my plan. our personalities, our character, the people don't gel. And it's not going to work for me or the school, right? It's not a knock. It's just that it's like that would be you buying a pair of shoes that are too small. They're never going to fit. Like, so why would you buy them? So the longer I've gone through this, I've realized it's not about, you got to have a plan. Don't get me wrong, but it's about, do you as a person, as a leader, fit what they're looking for?
Why was Memphis the right fit for you?
Me and the AD, we gelled. Dr. Ed Scott is an unbelievable leader. We have similar backgrounds, so we've come kind of through some of the similar ranks. Our confidence, our vibe was great from the start. He's done his due diligence. He's the leadership style that he leads with is what I typically, or what I'm able to flourish in. It was a comfortable, it would just be like me and you talking right now, man. It was just a comfortable, it wasn't a, oh my God, I'm on an interview with Memphis. It was a comfortable kind of, not laid back, but still very organized. I mean, he's an extreme professionalist in his job, but he has that ability to be himself. And I felt that from him and the rest of the committee. And I felt like I can be myself at Memphis. The city fits me and my family and our style. This school fits me and myself, my family, our style. They've had success. They've been a very marketable brand. So it was just a really good fit. I don't have to try and be someone I'm not here. I can be myself. Like we say, when Dr. Scott comes around, it's not like, oh my God, the AD's here, straighten up your desk. We do it out of respect for the position, but he comes in and it's just a normal conversation between, two guys that are trying to be great. And that to me is what makes me want to win here for him, because I know he is a good person and a phenomenal leader.
We wanted to get you out of here on the last one. Memphis won a bunch of games, just won conference titles since 2014. What has to happen to change that, get you guys on top of the American and into the playoff?
Yeah, I think, sometimes people forget how hard it is to win. And it's even harder to win a championship. So I have a lot of respect for what Coach Norvell, what Coach Fuente, what Coach Silverfield have done here to establish the part where we're saying they've won a lot of games, they haven't won a championship. There's a lot of schools that would love to be able to say that. I think there's a few things, right? You got to have the personnel. Let's just be honest. You got to stay healthy. That's the key, right? When you get into these late season games against quality opponents, you got to have your guns and ready to go. And then I think it's a cultural mindset. A cultural mindset of, okay, we've been good. What do we need to do on a daily basis to close the gap, as I say, right? What do we need to do daily, consistently to be great? What do we need to do from a recruiting standpoint daily? What do we need to do from a culture standpoint daily? How do we need to hold our players accountable in academics and running and treatments and all those things daily, so that when we get into the season, we don't have those moments of, hey, we should do this, but we had an off game, or, hey, we're playing well, and then all of a sudden we spin our wheels. I think closing the gap on greatness is a very small, deliberate grind of daily habits, not necessarily, hey, we got to be better in recruiting, or we need more funding, or we need a different system. I think it's a collective mindset of what do we need to do daily to change the narrative, and that's what we're trying to do. I can't speak for what has been done here before because I wasn't here. But from my perspective, what we need to do is daily change our habits so that it becomes who we are and not who we're trying to be come game day.
Actually, one other, sorry. I covered the Cotton Bowl here in 2020 when Memphis made it here in Dallas. I've been there a couple of times. I know they got the new facilities. Renovating the Liberty Bowl will be done pretty soon. Memphis has tried to make that push into the Big 12. I mean, what is the big vision there? What's the ceiling at a place like Memphis, and how did they kind of pitch it to you on where Memphis wants to get to and how you can get them there?
Yeah, well, I think, big picture, Memphis wants to be in a Power 4 conference. And I think that's where college football is going. I think you've got to be able, if you have the ability or the capacity to get into a Power Four conference. I think that's the number one determining factor to sustain success. You got to get in a conference that's going to be able to keep you afloat. With that, you've got to have the facilities, you've got to have the resources, you got to have the revenue coming in so that you can sustain once you get there. And then the final piece is you got to have the profile. We've got to win a championship. We've got to get in a championship game. We've got to get into the college football playoffs. These Power Four conferences are not orphanages. They're not just taking on any old schools. They're taking on schools that are going to increase their profile. So we have to be a school that holistically, not just from a football standpoint, but from an academic standpoint, from a resource standpoint, from a branding standpoint, we have to be a school that presents well enough for one of these conferences to say, we want you in our conference representing our brand. Like I said, there's levels. My job as the head football coach is to make sure we increase or enlarge our football brand or profile by getting us to a conference championship, winning a conference championship, getting into the college football playoffs, competing in the college football playoffs. So that's the part that I can control. I think Dr. Scott and his constituents, his cabinet, his administration have done a good job of increasing the facilities, of increasing the revenue streams, of changing the mindset of not only the people here on campus, but in the community of, if we're going to be a Power Four school, we have to start operating as a Power Four school, not just from on the field or on the playing surface athletically, but everything we do. And I think Dr. Scott, his group has done that on the other side. Now on the football side, Coach Huff's got to do his part.
Coach, we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Congratulations on the success. Good luck at Memphis.
Yep. Thanks, Coach. Appreciate the time.
Man. Yeah. Thank you guys. Best of luck to you. Go Tigers, go.